So Assad uh, put out a statement, essentially, telling people what happened, trying to clarify. Not sure if he really needed to put out this statement. I guess he needed to say something, I suppose. I don't know if this really has any meaning whatsoever, but let me just go ahead and read it to you. This has been somewhat verified to have come from Assad. This did come from the this came from the actual like presidential social media account, which I guess Assad had changed the passwords to, and the rebel forces do not have access to, according to Kevork Almasian, who was on the show. So the conclusion is that this genuinely is from Assad, that he's the only one who has access to the accounts that posted this statement. So this is it. From Moscow, December 16th, 2024, as terrorism spread across Syria and ultimately reached Damascus on the evening of Saturday, 7th, December 2024, questions arose about the president's fate and whereabouts. This occurred amidst a flood of misinformation and narratives far removed from the truth, aimed at recasting international terrorism as a liberation revolution for Syria. At such a critical juncture in the nation's history where truth must take precedence, it is essential to address these distortions. Unfortunately, the prevailing circumstances at the time, including a total communication blackout for security reasons, delayed the release of his statement. This does not replace a detailed account of the events that unfolded, which will be provided when the opportunity allows. So this is just a condensed version of what happened. First, my departure from Syria was neither planned nor did it occur during the final hours of the battles, as some have claimed. On the contrary, I remained in Damascus, carrying out my duties until the early hours of Sunday, 8th of December, 2024. As terrorist forces infiltrated Damascus, I moved to Latakia in coordination with our Russian allies to oversee combat operations. Upon arrival at the Maimam Air Base that morning, it became clear that our forces had completely withdrawn from all battle lines and that the last army positions had fallen. As the field situation in the area continued to deteriorate, the Russian military base itself came under intensified attack by drone strikes. With no viable means of leaving the base, Moscow requested that the base's command arrange an immediate evacuation to Russia on the evening of Sunday, the 8th of December. This took place a day after the fall of Damascus, following the collapse of the final military positions and the resulting paralysis of all remaining state institutions. At no point during these events did I consider stepping down or seeking refuge, nor was such a proposal made by any individual or party. The only course of action was to continue fighting against the terrorist onslaught. I reaffirmed that the person who, from the very first day of the war, refused to barter the salvation of his nation for personal gain or to compromise his people in exchange for numerous offers and enticements is the same person who stood alongside the officers and soldiers of the army on the front lines, just meters from the terrorists in the most dangerous and intensified battles. He is the same person who, during the darkest years of the war, did not leave but remained with his family alongside his people, confronting terrorism under bombardment and the recurring threats of terrorist incursions into the capital over 14 years of war. Furthermore, the person who has never abandoned the resistance in Palestine and Lebanon, nor betrayed his allies who stood by him, cannot possibly be the same person who would forsake his own people or betray the army and the nation which he belongs to. I have never sought positions for personal gain, but have always considered myself a custodian of a national project supported by the faith of the Syrian people who believed in its vision. I have carried an unwavering conviction in their will and ability to protect the state, defend its institutions, and uphold their choices to the very last moment. When the state falls into the hands of terrorism and the ability to make a meaningful contribution is lost, any position becomes void of purpose, rendering its occupation meaningless. This does not in any way diminish my profound sense of belonging to Syria and her people, a bond that remains unshaken by any position or circumstance. It is a belonging filled with hope that Syria will once again be free and independent. And just to note, this was released in Arabic and also in English. So I'm not sure if it was translated from Arabic into English or if he revealed both at the same time, which would make sense. He does speak both languages. Okay, so what is interesting about this is there were some questions about the final hours of Damascus. There was thinking that Assad had fled, and the reason, and because he fled, was the reason why the military just gave up. That he was like, "All right, I'm out of here. I'm running off to Russia," and then the military was like, "Well, then what's worth fighting for? I guess we're just gonna skip the fight and we're just gonna put down our weapons." There was a thinking that that's what happened. There were some other reports that Russia had basically told him it's time to give up and time to come to Russia. This statement, essentially, I guess what's important about the statement, I suppose, is him saying, none of that happened. I stayed until the end. And then when we lost, I left. And I think that's fair enough. I mean, look, if you've lost, why stay? You know, your fate is death at that point. So if you've lost, you should probably, it's in your best interest and in your family's best interest to leave and seek refuge somewhere else. Many leaders of countries have done that. So that's essentially what he's clarifying in this, is that he was there until the end. And when it became really clear that they had lost, that's when he finally left. But he wasn't leaving until that point. So take that for what you will. It's not satisfactory to the Syrian people who supported him. They're still pretty pissed off. They feel betrayed. But I think that the betrayal, you know, what could he have done about? I get the Syrian people are feeling betrayed by Assad, that now they're in the hands of Al Qaeda, and that really, you know, who knows? I mean, they're kind of in limbo. We'll find out what happens to Syria and how it turns out. But how can you really? I think the blame should begin well before Assad losing and leaving. It should fall at the corruption, the issue of corruption within the military, the issue of the fighters losing morale. So whenever that happened, that's really when Syria lost. Once you lose the morale of your fighters, and or you lose them to corruption and they start getting greedy. I mean, we're seeing this in Ukraine. So Ukraine is having a really similar problem. And this happens a lot in war, especially when people don't really understand what exactly they're fighting for. There's a lot of confusion. In the case of Syria, there was just too many people, and there's too many fronts, too many battles. You never knew who was on your side or who wasn't on your side. I mean, it was just such a mess there that fighters, the average person, the average kid who's being conscripted to fight, they are not, they're just there thinking, am I going to die today? And is it worth dying? I don't know if it's worth dying for. I don't even know who I'm fighting. I don't know who the enemy is. I don't know what's going on. Oh, you're offering me a bunch of money to do something else. And yeah, maybe this is bribery or corruption, but whatever. I've got a family and I've got to look out for myself. So once you start going into that path, that's when your military's gone. And that's when your country has a difficult time. And we see that not even in wartime. I mean, that's been happening in Mexico for a long time. The corruption within the police has kept the cartels going. And it's very difficult to have a country that can actually function when you have corruption. And that's unfortunately, I think, really what was the death knell for Syria was all of that corruption. I'm sure if we sniffed out that trail, we would find that a lot of that bribery and a lot of that corruption came from outside forces. Perhaps the West even was involved in quite a bit of that, knowing that if you could chip away at the leadership, if you can get them corrupt, you're going to start losing morale in the military, and just soon enough, you're going to lose. The person who has the most fight and the most grit those are the people who are going to win a war, especially a war like these. So, yeah, he left. I mean, I can't blame the guy. It was the end. They lost. So that is what it is. Other interesting things going on in Syria while we're on the topic. Israel is taking more land and bombing the hell out of Syria. So they actually bombed, they had a huge bomb that they set off in Syria that, I mean, look at this thing. It's so big that this actually registered a 3.0 on the Richter scale. So a question is, what is Israel doing? Why are they bombing Syria? I thought, Assad's gone. Why are they bombing Syria now? They're claiming that they're bombing all of the weapons. They weren't able to bomb the weapons when Assad was there because Russia would back them up, Iran would back them up. It would have resulted in retaliation against Israel. And now they kind of have this carte blanche to go and get rid of all of the weapons in Syria. And so that is what they're doing. And they're claiming that this bomb went off and it hit a weapons depot, and that's what caused this massive explosion. But look at this. It caused a 3.0 on the Richter scale. Israel's also, while they're bombing Syria, they're taking a lot more land. They've been going into the Golan Heights, taking all this land, permanently making it part of theirs. Look at how much land they've taken from Syria. And look at the land they've taken from Lebanon as well, all of this blue area. This is what Israel's calling a buffer zone. So what's interesting is that this is also what Russia is doing in Ukraine and calling it a buffer zone. But when Russia does it, it's an invasion and a war crime. But when Israel's doing it, it's okay. It's for national security. So see the hypocrisy right there between, depending on how you feel about it, you might say, I mean, for one, I don't think southern Lebanon nor the Golan Heights were filled with people just begging to be part of Israel. I don't think there was like a ton of Jews living in these areas and they were under Syrian control or they were under Lebanon, Hezbollah control, and they were just waiting for the day that Israel would come and take them and liberate them. That is different. So that is a bit of a difference of what's gone on in Russia to Ukraine versus what Israel is doing. And we're championing this and we're saying that this is okay. In this circumstance, it's okay to clear out, to take land that has a bunch of people on it that are not Jewish people. These are Arab people, they're Syrian people. You're taking the land, you're planning to clear them out and push them further into Syria. Same thing with Lebanon. If you're going to take this buffer zone, this is very different than what Russia's doing with Ukraine. Russia didn't take the Donbass, for example, and then say, all right, all you people got to go. All of you Ukrainians have got to go further into Ukraine. No, these people in Donbass, they're Russian. And Russia says, all right, we're here and you can continue to be Russian. And they said, great. So a huge difference. Yet so how is one a war crime and how is the other one national security building a buffer zone? So just some more hypocrisy that we're seeing, things that just don't make sense, right? What else? Oh, the EU. So another thing is that Russia's got all these bases in Syria. These bases are really important to Russia. They use these as launch pads for a lot of their activities in Africa. What are they doing in Africa? There's a lot of terrorism in Africa, the growth of like Boko Haram, for example. They're all basically Al-Qaeda and ISIS that have entered into Africa. Russia has been helping secure and eradicate a lot of those terrorists. A lot of that is done for their own interests of, their own economic interests and trade interests. Some of it is also in the interests of China, who's also trying to build a Belt and Road Initiative, which is also something that benefits Russia. So there are some, of course, they're not just going into Africa, fighting the terrorists out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it, of course, because they have some benefit to it. But nonetheless, they need these Syrian bases in order to get into Africa. However, the EU is now telling the new Al-Qaeda rebels who are in charge of Syria that they need to demand Russia leave, get their bases out of Syria. Otherwise, they will sanction and they will not recognize the new government of Syria. Whichever that new government ends up being, they're not going to recognize it unless they get Russia out of Syria. And that's interesting because we were told this whole time it was really all about Assad, right? It was all Assad, Assad, Assad. Once Assad is gone, everything will be fine. And yet really it has to do with clearly these Russian bases that are in Syria because they're going to treat the new regime just the same as they did Assad. They're telling them if they don't get rid of the Russian bases, nothing will change. We don't care if Assad is not there anymore. Nothing will change unless you get the Russians out of there. So now you know it was really about the Russians, that this is what this had to do with, the Russian bases in Syria. Okay, well, now we're clear on that it had nothing to do with Assad. So we'll see what the rebels decide to do in regards to Russian bases. The United States is also bombing all around Syria as well. The U.S. says that they are targeting ISIS, trying to make sure that ISIS doesn't build back up and take advantage of the instability, the current instability in Syria. So Syria is basically just getting bombed. They got rid of Assad. They got what they wanted. They're still blowing the heck out of the place and taking land and demanding the Russians leave. And that's really what it's about. So we'll see what happens. We'll keep you updated with the latest when it comes to Syria and all of the various different updates that happen there. Just really unfortunate, really insane. I don't know how the actors in the Middle East I don't know how they continue on with this without saying, look, we want stability. And clearly the actors that are causing all this instability is Israel and the United States, the West, meddling in our business. Leave us alone. We want you the heck out of here. And that's really the basis of jihad. I mean, the jihadists, that's what they were trying to do. That's always been their aim, is just to get the invaders out of their country. So we're going to see a ramping up of the jihadis. We're going to see a ramping up of that, more of that, when they want the Western influence out. They're going to want the Turks' influence out. They're going to want U.S. influence out. They're going to want Israel's influence out. And we're just going to see more terrorism, not less terrorism. That's my prediction as we move forward. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show. If you want to watch the full show, visit KimIversonShow.com. The show airs every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, KimIversonShow.com. See you there.